Once again, we are very privileged to have one of our advisory board members, Graeme, Bibby, who is the CIO of Partners Wealth Group, interviewing one of our key strategic partners from the US, Dan Tapiero, who heads up 50T. Over to you, Graeme.
Yes, Dan. It'd be good if you could introduce yourself a little bit about your background and then how you got into the digital assets ecosystem.
Yeah, hi. Thanks, Graeme. Well, believe it or not, I'm an old-time gold guy, and was in the macro hedge fund business in the 90s and 2000s, and worked for Julian Robertson at Tiger in the early 90s and Michael Steinhardt, and then later on I ended up working for Steve Cohen at SAC Capital for 10 years, and then with Stan Druckenmiller at Duquesne, and that was sort of 20 years in the macro hedge fund business. I had my own fund called DTAP Capital as well. And I was always trading gold and very interested in, fiat currency and currency trading, and started a physical gold business called GBI, Gold Bullion International, in 2008 and 2009. And, some of the principles that make Bitcoin valuable, store of value, limited supply, hard asset, a hedge against the debasement of currency, all those things apply to gold. They also apply to Bitcoin. And so believe it or not, and I know sometimes there's a little bit of a back and forth between the gold crowd and the Bitcoin crowd, but they're more similar than certainly, the gold crowd is to the equity group or the bond group, right? And so intellectually, I understood gold in a deep way, and I'd been trading it since the 90s. I had my business. And then that business in 2013 integrated with a company called BitReserve, which today is the Uphold wallet. And that was the first place in the world where you could buy or sell gold to buy or sell Bitcoin or Ripple. And you can still do that today on the Uphold. If you have an Uphold wallet, that's us in the background. We built that architecture, GBI. And so that was my first, interest, my first connection to the space. And at the time, Ripple was trading 1/10 of 1 penny. Believe it or not, it's $3 today. And Bitcoin, was under a few $100s. But I retired for money management in 2012, and I put my brain on hold for, at least 6 years. So I was not actively involved in the space in those years. I kicked myself a little bit for not doing it. But that was my introduction. I came from the old money management world, and I was a gold-oriented guy. And Bitcoin was just a very obvious store of value to me. But, what I'm doing today, that's a longer story.
Yeah, and I guess getting to that, so today you're launching your fifth fund in this digital asset ecosystem area and targeting 500 million. Can you tell us a bit about why now and how you plan to invest the portfolio?
Yeah. We are the 50T funds. We're launching our fifth fund. We have 2 billion AUM currently. We've invested in 24 companies in the space. We sit on 12 board seats. We invest generally in more developed, mature businesses in the space, companies making at least 50 million in revenue, with, a proper balance sheet and income statement. These are companies that we think can withstand the volatility in the space and survive and flourish during bull and bear markets. And so the portfolio is diversified by geography, but it's also diversified by bucket. We have different focal points within the portfolio. There's consumer, there's blockchain infrastructure, there's finance, and we own 3 to 4 companies in each of those buckets. As I said, our focus is to build a portfolio that has some embedded protection on the downside as well. So we tend to invest in preferred securities that have liquidation preferences. I've got a team of 21. We're 6 partners, 7 analysts. We spend a lot of time doing diligence and research and making sure that we're investing in companies that don't disappear, because, as you know, this is a very difficult space. Lots going on, very hard to keep track of everything. and our process, our diligence process is really all we have. So the fifth fund is going to be a $500 million fund. I have a feeling it's going to be significantly oversubscribed because we're going to be returning within the next 6 months over 50% of the original capital that was committed to the first three funds, and then 20% of the capital that was committed to Fund 4, which actually just closed in November of 24. And so amongst private equity fund vintages of 21 and 22, we're going to be in the top, I would say, 2 or 3 percentage points of all PE funds globally in all areas. And I suspect we're going to have 2 more IPOs that happened. We had, of course, Circle IPO that we were involved with. We owned eToro before the IPO. Deribit was a company that we owned that just got bought by Coinbase in the single largest transaction in the history of the crypto markets. But then we have Gemini and Figure coming public in Q4, and then Kraken in Q1. And I think, within the next, as I said, 6 to 7 months, we probably could return, after all of those deals, we'll be returning well over 100% of the original committed capital. I think that, frankly, will put us at the very top of the leaderboard in private equity. So I think returning all that capital, it'll be over $1 billion. Will definitely, I think we'll definitely hit our $500 million target. Maybe we upsize that. We'll see. We'll see how things go. Maybe we get some hits in Australia.
That sounds good. Well, I think, the key thing for me is that you're really differentiated being in growth equity, and not venture capital. So for me, that's a standout, and pretty much no one doing that. When you look at, how the ecosystem's growing, and, why have you called the fund now 50T? It was, the previous few 10T. What's the rationale for that?
Well, there's a natural progression there, which I'm sure, will make sense to you. I mean, when I first had the idea for launching the fund in the middle of 2019, the total value in the space, so Bitcoin, Ethereum, all the altcoins, and all the equity, all of it was worth $300 billion if you added it all up. And I thought to myself, okay, well, we're making a 10-year investment. These are 10-year life funds, 10-year investment in the space. How big could this space get? And so I very conservatively assessed that we could hit $10 trillion in value over the coming 10 years. So that would be by 2029. But I thought that, no one would believe me if I just said that I had said that was my view. So I wanted to put that in the name of my fund as a marker, as a stamp. And so we called the funds 10T to stand for 10 trillion, which was a 30x. I mean, I had never before in my career, even attempted to call a 30x, a 30 times return on anything. Well, fast forward, here we are today, 2025, we're launching Fund 5, and the value of the space is now at 5 trillion. And so we're up 15 times from, my initial thought and the naming of the fund. And so it seems a little preposterous to me launching our fifth fund to call it 10T again, because a 2X wouldn't be very interesting given our view. And so I sat back a few months ago and I thought, what could the value be here? Looking at the fact that there are $800 trillion of total assets, and, thinking that most of the world's value and money will eventually move on chain. I think that over the next 10 years, 50 trillion from today's 5T makes sense. I think we have a 10X coming, but those are very big dollars. That's not 300 billion to 5 trillion. This is 5 trillion to 50 trillion. Very big dollars. I think Bitcoin can hit 1 million within 10 years. That'll be $20 trillion in value. Ethereum and the other altcoins, another 10 trillion. And then I think all of the businesses and the equity in the space that are connected to blockchain or crypto, Web3, digital assets, that's another 20 trillion. And so I add those three up and I get 50 trillion. And we're building a fund that is going to be leveraged to the growth in the move from 5T to 50T.
Yeah. So a final question. How do you think that individuals, investors and their advisors should think about how they invest in the digital asset ecosystem?
Well, Graeme, as I said to you before, I say the same thing to all of our prospective investors and to all of the investors out there that say no to the funds. I say, listen, you must have a little bit of exposure to Bitcoin. Get a Coinbase or a Kraken or a Gemini wallet. Have a little bit of Bitcoin. Have a little bit of Ethereum. Own a little bit of a venture fund, and then invest in us in a growth fund. And I think that four-pronged exposure gives you, I can say, with that exposure, with a high degree of certainty, if you hold that for 10 years, you will make several multiples on your money. And, as I said before, I have investors who say, well, look, I don't want to bother, buying Ethereum. I just want to give you all of our money. And I flatly say, no, I don't want people to just have us as the single exposure. I think we're going to do great. Our focus is to make a 5 to 10x, but we're in a very specific area of the market, and it's important for new investors to really learn, how to move around in this world, how to actually set up, your digital wallet. I think lots of things in the future will be going through your digital wallet. Might be identity, might be RWAs, real world assets. It might be that everything that you have of value sits in your digital wallet and sits in your phone. So it's not good enough to just outsource it to me. I know what I'm doing. I've been doing this a long time. We really try to encourage our investors to learn themselves and actually learn by doing. So that's my advice.
Great. Look, thanks very much, Dan. It's great to hear the history and heritage, where the fund is and where you're seeing the allocations could look like for investors in the future. So, look, thanks very much from the Kingsgate Capital Partners team. And any queries from the team, please reach out. And you can find them, if you don't have their contact details, on the website, Kingsgate Capital Partners. So please reach out for any questions on that for anyone interested in the 50T fund and any follow-up questions. Thanks very much, Dan, and Kingsgate for organising this.